Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Miriam. That was great. It was good to see some walnuts on the table this morning. I think it's fantastic when producers can share their products with the audience. So if you all look under your chairs, you'll find a small plastic bag. Not really, I wasn't allowed to. Drug jokes, risky opening. My name's Max Edgley. I'm Head of Cultivation at Tasmania Botanics. We're a vertically integrated medicinal cannabis company. I'm originally from Launceston, so it's good to be home. Sorry about the weather. But I now live and work in Hobart at Tasmania Botanics. So please, if anyone's in Hobart over the next few days, feel free to stop by. We'd love to have you through. So my topic focused on the cannabis industry in Australia. I looked at all things cannabis, but I had a primary focus on how to successfully scale cannabis operations and how the industry might develop, both in terms of cultivation trends and consumer trends over the next few years. So I'll start today by giving you a bit of a background about cannabis in Australia. It's a very new industry that probably most people don't know a lot about. So I'll give a look at where we're headed into the future by looking at how it's developed in overseas markets, look at consumer trends and cultivation trends. So Tasmania Botanics, as I mentioned, we're a vertically integrated cannabis company. We were established in 2017, shortly after the announcement of the medical cannabis scheme in Australia for medical and scientific purposes. We were granted our first permits in 2019. At the time, and still now, it's a very convoluted, expensive and time-consuming permitting and licensing process. So it took about 2 years to get those original permits. And then it wasn't until 2021 where we were able to actually start selling products because of the pharmaceutical sort of accreditation scheme and that sort of thing that you have to go through. So here's some photos of our facilities. The first photo is before we commenced building out the facility. So we're actually stationed in a decommissioned prison, which is it contains all the infrastructure that the Australian government deems necessary to grow cannabis in Australia, which is a bit excessive at times, but it was a purpose-built. So the fences and security infrastructure are already there. 2018, 2019, we began to repurpose or get rid of a lot of the buildings and that sort of thing, and we built a 2,000 square metre greenhouse. So we were granted our first cultivation permits in 2019, and we started growing plants and went through the very lengthy and expensive process of becoming GMP, so good manufacturing processes, accredited, which is the pharmaceutical accreditation scheme that allows you to sell a pharmaceutical product, manufacture a pharmaceutical product in Australia. Since then, we also have a 3-hectare outdoor crop where we grow about 10,000 plants annually. And we've just finished commissioning, or almost finished commissioning, a 10,000 square metre higher tech glasshouse. So we've been pretty careful to scale this with the growing industry. So we're still fitting out the greenhouse. We grow year round in the greenhouse in a perpetual harvest system. So we've got all sorts of climate controls. We've got LED lighting, double screen systems, misting technology, that allows us to have multiple crops in the greenhouse at any one time, and we harvest the oldest plants every 2 weeks and bring in the young plants every 2 weeks. It ensures consistency of supply. So here's some photos of our products as well. Our primary focus is dried cannabis flower, which is probably 70% of the market in Australia, but we also have supercritical CO2 extraction machines, which can produce oils, and we make novel formulations like vape carts. So medical cannabis in Australia is probably something that most people don't know a lot about. It's a pretty new industry, and a lot of people are not really aware of what it's about and how large it is. So medical cannabis refers to the use of the cannabis plant and its active compounds, known as cannabinoids, to treat various health conditions. There's 2 main cannabinoids that are used, THC, which is the psychoactive compound, gets you high, and CBD, which is non-psychoactive but used for its therapeutic benefits such as anti-inflammatory and other health benefits. So a common question I get from people outside of the industry that don't know much about it is, do your products, are they cannabis, are they weed? Yes, they will get you high. Most of the products in Australia are high THC products. So in 2021, when the industry was really starting to develop and Tasbotanics was essentially still pre-revenue, was a perfect time for me to embark on a Nuffield journey. It's not often you sort of get to travel to the future, but at the time, sort of these more mature markets were exactly that. They're a crystal ball into what the future of cannabis industry in Australia would look like over the next few years and up to the next 10 to 20 years. So my travels took me to US, Canada, America, Netherlands, Israel, Germany, Portugal and Spain. But the most significant lessons by far came from the North American markets, and they still do. They're light years ahead of us in terms of market development, breeding, market trends, cultivation facilities and everything. It's really amazing to travel there and see where we might be headed. So for context, in North America, in Canada, cannabis is fully legal for adult use. It's a federally regulated market since 2017, and pretty much any cannabis product you can imagine is available for purchase at over 3,000 shops throughout the country, population of 40 million people. And last year they generated $8 billion of sales through these shops. $4 billion of that was direct revenue to the direct tax revenue to the Canadian government. So it's really significant. In the US, it's a little bit more fragmented. Next slide. In the US, it's a little bit more fragmented due to it still being federally illegal. So the 35 or so states that all have their own little enclosed markets, cannabis can't cross state borders, so you get these little quirks in each market as they go through their own boom and bust cycles. And it's really interesting to study these individual markets at an individual level. So the main thing that really takes your breath away when you travel to these markets is simply the scale and the value of the markets. So in America, the legal market covers 236 million people, 75% of the population, and last year it was the 5th most valuable crop grown in America, which is just insane. You don't hear about it. This is all despite American cannabis farmers not having access to any federal assistance programs. So they don't have any access to USDA assistance. They don't have access to crop insurance. They don't even have access to banking. So you get producers, retailers, distributors, all transacting in cash, which is it's just crazy for it's a $10 billion industry. And it's changing and it's evolving, but it's really eye-opening to see. So one of the main things I looked at is where Australia might head by looking at these really socioeconomically similar countries to Australia. And the main takeaways for Australian producers is that sales growth in Australia will probably continue. We're pretty sizable now, but we're only scratching the surface if we follow the same trends that North America has seen. So rapid growth will continue, but rapid price compression will also be severe. We're already seeing that in 2024, with prices coming way down as we sort of get flooded by imports. And the other thing is that Australia doesn't show any signs of being a mature market in terms of consumer trends. So we're dominated by oils and flowers, and as the market matures, that will change. America's crazy. Anything you can think of, they'll put weed into it. Literally anything. I think the most interesting one I saw was I was at a conference in Vegas, and there was these little sausages that they were handing out to the audience. They didn't communicate that they were actually infused. That was an interesting presentation. And the other thing I looked at was who wins and who loses in a deregulation situation like we saw in Canada. And there's some really clear lessons. And it came down to a case of the good, the bad and the ugly, really. And the good, the winners were the government and the consumers. So in the 3 years following legalisation in Canada, the cannabis industry contributed over $44 billion in generated economic activity to the Canadian GDP. It created over 150,000 jobs and more than $15 billion in direct tax revenue, and that's increased since then. So it's just a really sizable industry. So now consumers have access to legal, affordable, high-quality cannabis. Before, they had access to a lot of cannabis, but the government just wasn't seeing any of that revenue. So by all accounts, consumer trends haven't really changed that much. Consumption hasn't necessarily increased, but now the government's making billions of dollars. The bad was really the boom and bust cycles that we saw. You see a massive spike in prices and then a really, really sharp decline in prices. And only 27% of producers were profitable last year in North America. I'm not sure how that compares to wider agriculture, but I suspect it's not great. And that's primarily due to high taxes, high regulatory barriers and complex regulations. They also have to compete with the illicit industry that obviously doesn't pay any tax, but is now less regulated. And really the ugly was the massive overinvestment that we saw in public cannabis companies. So there was probably a dozen or more companies in Canada that collectively raised tens of billions of dollars in public money with these massive IPOs. They all went on just mad spending sprees. There was examples of companies building $500 million glass houses with the capacity to supply most of the world with cannabis. 2 years later, they were selling those glass houses for literally pennies on the dollar. They were selling them for $5 and $10 million when they never even fitted them out. So it was just crazy overinvestment, massive loss of public money, and massive overcapitalisation. So there were some pretty clear lessons for Australian producers. The cannabis industry will likely be significant, but legislation has to keep up with the industry, with consumer expectations, and it needs to be well thought out. So we need to encourage responsible growth with smart regulations, avoid over-taxation, but regardless, producers should prepare for big boom and bust cycles by keeping costs low, scaling responsibly and not over-investing. They should also look at adding value and keeping up with consumer trends in a really rapidly evolving consumer market. Lastly, this is an interesting graph in the middle there. It shows the average timeline that US states have taken transitioning from a medical market to an adult use market, which is the path that most of them have gone down. So the average timeline there is 7.5 years across more than 30 states. Interestingly, it's been 7.5 years since Australia legalised cannabis for medical purposes. So I don't think we're going to see that sort of timeline, but it's an interesting discussion point that we followed America into cannabis criminalisation in 1926. It was the only reason we did it. So we probably should be looking at following them out of it as they abandon that legislation. Lastly, just a big thanks to my sponsor, J.M. Roberts Charitable Trust, the Tas Institute of Agriculture, and Tasmanian Botanics, who allowed me to travel and spend a lot of money doing this sort of thing. We're the first sponsor of a Nuffield conference, first cannabis sponsor of a Nuffield conference ever, but hopefully not the last. Thank you.